Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today's topic, we're going to get real fast into it about recoil smoothing, what it is. I want to offer a quick apology because my last video I made about jitter aiming, I should have explained recoil smoothing. Just want to remind everyone that jitter aiming is a technique that can be used in general. Just kind of wiggle your hand to counteract recoil, but there is a mechanic in Apex Legends that can get activated that most will also call abuse because of what recoil smoothing is. Let's get into that right now. And I'm going to timestamp this as well. So let's just shoot from a distance here just to showcase regular recoil. What happens whenever you shoot a flat line from this distance? You'll see the recoil that kicks in. Now, if you try to even control this recoil, so I'm going to move all the way over here to the left. Let's say you're tracking somebody really slow. I am moving my mouse to the left, but we are noticing, yeah, I move my mouse and I'm moving a little bit. So let's go up close and personal. I just want to highlight that so you can see it visually because there are markers on the wall, that the recoil kicks up pretty high on the wall. And even here, I did move a little bit to the left on my mouse, but what I'm going to do now, and what you're going to see, which is a pretty dramatic difference of what recoil smoothing is that when you're moving left and right at a certain distance and tracking something, that the recoil is actually going to kick up considerably less. I'm going to look at this marker right here. I'm probably not at the exact same distance as I was earlier, but it's still, no matter what, going to be very dramatic. So let's do that now. So moving left and right, I'm not pulling down. And let's move forward. Because you saw my hand, I was strictly moving left and right. And you notice that the recoil really only peaked around here. Compared to where it went up all the way over here. I'm not pulling down. It's the same movement if I was moving left or right. So we'll even showcase this on a different wall just to give another example. So if I were to, let's say, just shoot here, just as an example, we'll really back up. And I do like a recoil. Let's move a little bit further here. Right here is fine. Let's take a shot. And I move over to the left just a little bit and move. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that same recoil, but I'm going to move considerably to the left. Look at that. You see that line that you're already seeing is such a dramatic difference. And this is why, fast tip, whenever you're using this with jitter aiming, which we're going to timestamp here, is that if you're jitter aiming and you're trying to get that recoil smoothing to move left and right at that speed and velocity, then the recoil is much less. And you're kind of abusing that because you still have to jitter aim. And this is why it's used, because there's still random spikes that will go up a little bit too far up. And you still have to control that. Even though there's recoil smoothing, the vertical is much less. And this happens with other guns. You can do this as well. Like if we switch right now to the R301, so I'm going to load that out. I just want to make sure I'm hitting this as hard as possible. That jitter aiming can be used in various FPS games that do not have recoil smoothing. In Apex Legends, as we're seeing based on my jitter aiming video and recoil smoothing, that they are two separate mechanics. But these two separate mechanics, when paired together, can be a deadly combo. So I just want to make sure that those are very understood, that when you're seeing recoil smoothing, not all FPS games have that. But jitter aiming is something that you can use in other games, even if there is no recoil smoothing as a technique. And that technique is going to be personal preference, and I have a link down in the description. I know I reminded later in the video. But I figured that this is really, really important because there's a lot of confusion about these two techniques being paired or being called the same thing. But in the reality, they are two separate mechanics, but it's just that they tie so closely together. So let's showcase the R301 footage. All right, this is a jump cut just to explain this. I'm going to move further back here so you can really see it. So if I just take shots with the regular recoil, no barrel stabilizer, and it kicks up, you see that recoil there. If I were to track something moving at, let's say, a little bit slower of a pace over to the right, there's still quite a bit of recoil there. But if I smooth that recoil out by moving at a certain velocity or distance, this really depends on your sensitivity. So biggest tip is just kind of feel it out. But again, if I move that recoil, and let's go ahead and move that to the right, notice how that it really smooths it out to the point where the recoil, like even at the wall, you saw that line. It's very, very visual. It's very apparent of what's happening there. And so the biggest tip I can provide when you're jittering and you want to have that, it's a technique. You don't really have to jitter as long as you know the recoil and you're moving at a certain speed. Let's say you were to track something at a certain decent pace, that incorporating speed is not a bad thing. That's whenever you see like the octane flying in the air and then you do this. You don't necessarily have to account for as much recoil as you think that you need to, as long as you're incorporating speed to beat the recoil so there's less vertical. There's going to be more horizontal, which is what you kind of correct with the jittering, or just learning the recoil pattern, kind of moving left and right to counteract that recoil, especially when you're smoothing that out. Let's go and wrap up now with some quick tips of what you can do. So with jitter aiming, you can, the biggest thing is you kind of jitter left and right with your hand depending on your sensitivity. The other one is using your strafe to also counter the recoil. That's another way you can do it. Now, it can be a little harder to sometimes activate smoothing with that, like there's an example right there. So you'll have to make sure that the movement that you're doing is pretty broad with it, and the more that your opponent moves, the easier it is to kind of interact this recoil smoothing. So if you ever see somebody shooting somebody from above and they fly, you'll notice and you'll even feel it. So just go in the test range and feel this out. You do with this tip of what you may. Jitter aiming, you can still do that in various games. So if you're playing, let's say, Battlefield or another game that has recoil, you still want to try to beat the recoil. That's the goal. Even with smoothing, when you look at it and you see the smoothing, there is still some bumps up and down. So jitter aiming is still very applicable, and you still have to kind of make sure to counteract that recoil and still memorize it. It's much less vertical, though, and that's what you're trying to do if you're trying to, quote-unquote, abuse that mechanic. So do what you will with this information. It can be used on console, maybe less so with the jittering moving left and right with the sticks, but at least if you incorporate some broader movement, then you know the recoil smoothing by tracking somebody by going left and right at a certain speed is going to enable. Appreciate all of you guys for watching. I hope this was educational, very straightforward to the point. If you want to know more about jitter aiming and kind of jiggling your hand, I don't necessarily use that mechanic, but I have it there for educational purposes. Video is going to be in the link down in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one.